Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into Glasgow's cultural past, specifically through the lens of a pretty radical writer. Our mission is to explore the sources around Freddie Anderson. He was an Irish poet, playwright, socialist, lived 1922 to 2001, and uncover this idea of a suppressed history in a major European city.
Yeah, and it's more than just, looking at his life story. It's really about exploring this intellectual declaration of war he made.
Yeah.
Anderson wasn't just making art in Glasgow. He was actively challenging the city's image of itself. The sources we have combine his biography with this really powerful argument he made.
That's what's
Basically, that Glasgow's establishment for centuries actively, deliberately suppressed its own authentic working-class culture. So we're diving into, well, how that might have happened and why.
It's such a compelling mix, isn't it? This dual identity he had, born in Ireland, Ballybay, County Monaghan, but then he becomes this key figure in Glasgow's left-wing cultural scene, really from the 1950s on. And what seems unique is how he connects Scottish and Irish threads,
Yeah.
history, culture, all in a very anti-sectarian way. He was committed to both places.
Absolutely. That dual view is key. And to really get the bite of his cultural critique, we kind of need to follow his path from Ireland right into the heart of Glasgow's radical scene.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork. His early life. It's shaped by the war, right? He joined the RAF, the Royal Air Force, in 1942. And the sources point out, for many Irishmen then, it was either, well, strong political conviction or sometimes just the harsh reality of needing to send money home.
And it wasn't just signing up. He served abroad, India, Burma. That experience, seeing colonialism, seeing huge inequality up close, must have really cemented the socialist views he brought back.
So he comes back. He's demobilized in 46. Moves to Glasgow. Not long after, it's his wife Isabel's home city. They were married in 51. And apparently, he took to Glasgow straight away. But that County Monaghan influence, that Irish voice, it stayed with him in his writing.
Right. And the big career moment, it happens almost as soon as he arrives.
Yeah.
1947, he finds what he called his spiritual home, the Glasgow Unity Theatre. There's this great little story in the sources, him just going up to Roddy McMillan, the actor, in Social Street, introducing himself. McMillan must have seen something, because he takes this young Irishman for tea, and that basically opens the door for Anderson into the city's radical art scene.
So Glasgow Unity Theatre,
Yeah.
why was it so important? What was its actual purpose?
Well, it wasn't your typical community theater, not like we might think of it today. It was explicitly agitprop.
Agitation and propaganda.
Exactly. Its goal was political, using the stage to, challenge things, expose injustice, and crucially, to really find and use the talents of working-class actors and writers, people who were basically ignored by the mainstream London-focused culture scene. So for Anderson, with his growing socialist ideas, it was just a perfect place to mix art and activism.
Okay, so the theater is his platform. Let's look at what he actually created there. His output seems pretty varied, political plays, but also satire. His first play was 33 Years, right? Unity Theatre produced it in the late 40s.
Yes. And alongside the stage work, he built this reputation as a poet, very much in the oral tradition. His style, the sources describe it as having a Celtic charm. Sometimes maybe critics felt it tipped into sentimentality. But when he was on form, he was actually compared to Patrick Kavanagh, another Monaghan poet, for the sheer insight, the raw truth in his poems. It was poetry that spoke directly to the people around him.
And he wasn't just writing about working class life from afar. He was actually living and working in places like Easterhouse. That commitment earned him an award from the Irish Post, didn't it?
It did, yeah. That hands-on involvement was crucial. Now, his most lasting theater works probably boil down to two key plays. They really show his range. First, there's Crassity from 1979.
Crassity. Okay, that one was about John MacLean, the Scottish leftist. For listeners maybe not familiar, who is MacLean and why stage a play about him in 79? What was radical about that?
MacLean was, a giant figure in Scottish revolutionary socialism, a Red Clydesider. He was a teacher, a fierce anti-war voice during World War I, jailed multiple times for sedition. So, putting on a play celebrating him in the late 70s, that was a pretty bold statement. It was like reaffirming that radical political line in Glasgow. And it worked. The play got great reviews, won a Fringe First Award at the Edinburgh Fringe.
That's quite an achievement. And the other big one was Oiny Hoy, much later in 1989. Described as a tale of a green fool. What was that about?
Oiny Hoy sort of brought everything together, the politics, but delivered with real wit. He uses this character, the Green Fool, who seems quite gentle, maybe a bit naive. And through this character, Anderson could playfully poke fun at Irish myths and stereotypes, challenge things without being overly aggressive. It's satire that kind of catches you off guard. And it was popular. It also did well at the Edinburgh Fringe. It showed he could land his critiques through humor just as effectively as through straight politics.
It's good his work has been collected and preserved. We know he struggled with illness later in life, lost his wife Isabel in '99, and then passed away himself in 2001. But his collected poems and prose came out fairly recently, 2020, and his papers are at Glasgow Caledonian University Library.
Yeah, that preservation is vital because his legacy isn't just the plays and poems themselves. It's this really exclusive idea he had about the city itself.
Right. Let's get into that. This is the core of our deep dive today. Anderson's big critique in his essay, The Culture of Glasgow. It's not just saying culture declined, it's an accusation, isn't it? Active historical suppression. What was his main point?
His central argument was that Glasgow's lack of sort of homegrown high culture wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lack of talent. It was deliberate. He argued the powers that be were deeply wary, his word, of opening the floodgates to what he called an immense popular culture.
And afraid because?
Because this local culture, rooted in Glasgow, not imported from London or Hollywood, was inherently dangerous to them. It would naturally challenge and, he thought, sweep away the hackneyed, time-worn ideas promoted by what he termed a servile, manipulated media machine. So basically, he saw a cultural elite holding onto power by controlling the story, by sidelining local voices that might rock the boat.
That's a huge claim. What historical examples did he point to? How far back did he say this went?
Oh, he goes way back, right back to the start, almost, to show this resistance to radical voices was immediate. Take Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet. When Burns's poems, the Kilmarnock edition, came out in 1786, exposing the establishment, you know what was the reaction in Glasgow? Silence. Deafening silence. Anderson points out Burns got not one single review in any Glasgow paper, just a couple of nasty critical letters in the Mercury.
Wow. To think Scotland's biggest literary star was just ignored by the cultural gatekeepers in its biggest city. That's pretty stark.
And he saw this disrespect literally carved in stone. He used the George Square monument, what he called the monument test, as a visual symbol. Decades before Burns got a proper monument, the city fathers put up the biggest, tallest one in the square for Sir Walter Scott, the loyalist minion, Anderson called him. Burns eventually got a plinth, a lower one, but Anderson stresses that was paid for by the ordinary people of Glasgow, their pennies, not by the establishment. Scott meant loyalty to the crown, the status quo. Burns meant democracy, radicalism. The very architecture showed who the elite favored.
That image, the loyalist high up, the people's radical lower down, really drives his point home.
It really does. And he showed this pattern continued. It wasn't just Burns. He mentioned the banning of a radical local paper, The Spirit of the Union, and its editor being transported, just shipped out in 1819. He talked about the poet Sandy Roger, a satirist, being imprisoned, and Anderson notes with clear frustration that Roger's excellent, challenging work is still kept out of the school curriculum.
And then there's the really tragic story of James MacFarlane.
MacFarlane. He's maybe the ultimate example of this wasted, ignored talent. Here's a poet whose ability was recognized by big names like Thackeray and Dickens, yet he was left to starve in Glasgow. Died of TB in an attic, age 30, buried in a pauper's grave. Anderson's argument was that by ignoring genuine, often radical voices like Roger MacFarlane, the establishment could push, well, sentimental, religious mush onto people during the Victorian era.
So the argument is empty literature of its power to protest, and you disarm people intellectually.
Exactly that. His conclusion is pretty damning. He says, this safe, escapist literature let people mentally tune out while Glasgow was becoming, quote, the greatest slum city in Europe. The powerful local protest writing that could have rallied people against those conditions was being stifled.
And he saw this carrying on, this sort of cultural narrow-mindedness, well into the 20th century, even with major figures.
Definitely.
Yeah.
He points out that even giants of modern Scottish literature like Hugh MacDiarmid, the key figure in the Scottish Renaissance, and Lewis Grassic Gibbon, author of A Scots Square, a modernist classic, they didn't get an easy ride from Glasgow's Philistines, as he called them.
The Gibbon example is quite something, isn't it? His widow being refused a second edition of A Scots Square by a Glasgow publisher. Well, in contrast, Anderson says something like, no mean city got heavily promoted. He called that book a slur on Glasgow, creating this false image of just, gangs and thugs.
Yeah, that's a really pointed comparison he makes.
But couldn't you argue? I mean, given the poverty of the time, wasn't No Mean City just reflecting a grim reality? How did Anderson counter the idea it wasn't intentional suppression, but just, a reflection of the times?
That's a fair question, and he tackles it. He wasn't denying the slums or the violence existed. His argument was about why that specific book was promoted over others. He felt No Mean City was pushed because it lacked political analysis. It offered sensational violence, which the middle and upper classes could kind of consume as, lurid entertainment. It confirmed their biases about the working class, whereas reading Gibbon or MacDiarmid, that was complex, political. It demanded, you think about why things were like that, demanded change. The official culture, he argued, preferred the easy spectacle over the difficult substance.
Okay, so if the official published culture was, in his view, either suppressed or just bad, where did Anderson think the real culture of Glasgow was actually happening?
Not in the city chambers, not in the posh galleries. It was down in the streets, among the tenement dwellers. That's where the real culture lived. It was built on collective memory and defiance.
And what did that look like? How did this real culture show itself?
Well, it showed itself in direct action. He mentions the bands playing during the hunger marches in the 30s. It was in the spirit of people like John MacLean and the Clyde Workers' Committee, but the key way it was kept alive was through the oral tradition.
Let's talk more about that oral tradition. You said it's central to his argument. It was more than just chatting, right? How did it work as resistance?
It was like a conscious passing down of knowledge, generation to generation. People learned the city's real radical history. The story behind the Colton Weaver's grave from 1787, say, or the Sight Hill Monument from 1820. They didn't learn it from school books or newspapers. They learned it, as he puts it, from their grannies and fathers and mothers, cousins and aunts. These stories, these songs, these street rhymes, they kept the history of struggle alive, person to person. It was a history the official channels couldn't easily control or censor.
So history itself became this kind of precious thing, guarded and passed down almost like a secret code.
Exactly, and Anderson summed it up powerfully. Culture, too, is politics. That living, breathing culture, he said. You could find it in the big rallies against the poll tax decades later. You could hear it in the proud, defiant songs of more recent figures like Matt McGinn or the folklorist Hamish Henderson. It was basically anywhere people collectively remembered and pushed back against the official story.
Freddie Anderson really lived his life immersed in that counterculture, didn't he? A struggle he kept up even through tough personal times, losing his wife Isabel in '99 before he died in 2001.
He did. And his final message, it still feels incredibly relevant. It's a sharp critique of how we consume art today. He had strong words for people who could easily afford tickets to see, Pavarotti's and co. He argued they're actually on the edge, the periphery of real culture.
Because they see culture as just another thing to buy.
Precisely. They treat culture like a commodity that money can buy. Anderson's point was, you can't buy real culture any more than you can buy love or friendship. It has to be earned, lived through shared experience, political awareness, engaging with your own history.
That's a powerful thought culture, as something shared and lived, not just purchased. So we've used Freddie Anderson's perspective to look at this hidden political history of Glasgow, a history told through poems, protests, and passed down stories. It leaves you, the listener, with a question, maybe. If a city's real story is often found in these unofficial channels, in family tales, in protest songs, not just in monuments or textbooks, what part of your own city's real culture might still be hidden? What stories did your grandparents know that never made it into the official record? That's definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.